what about recent studies into Pictish DNA? Do they shed any light on the Scythian connection and their origins in general? This is the story of the Picts.
History is full of mysteries, but few are as haunting as the story of the Scottish Picts, the painted warriors who vanished without a trace. For centuries, their origins, power, and disappearance baffled historians. But when scientists finally sequenced their DNA, the results exposed secrets buried for over 1,000 years. Join us as we uncover what they found and why this stunning discovery changes everything we thought we knew about Scotland's past. The lost warriors of ancient Scotland. Long before Scotland became the country we know today, a mysterious group of people lived among its hills and forests. They were known as the Picts, a name that once sent shivers down the spines of Roman soldiers. To their enemies, they were wild and unstoppable, their bodies covered in strange blue markings that made them look almost otherworldly. They lived in the far northern lands, surrounded by mist, ancient stones, and legends that still whisper through the Scottish winds. But for all their power and mystery, the truth about who they were was lost for centuries. The Picts were not just warriors, they were a world of secrets. They built their homes near rivers and mountains, farmed the rough lands, and guarded their traditions fiercely. Outsiders rarely understood them, and the Picts liked it that way. They spoke a language no one could decipher, and practiced rituals that left others in awe and confusion. Even the mighty Romans, who conquered nearly everything in their path, could never truly break the Picts. They built walls such as Hadrian's Wall to keep them out, yet the Picts always found a way through. They were shadows of the highlands, vanishing as quickly as they appeared, leaving their enemies terrified and bewildered. What made them so unforgettable wasn't just their bravery in battle, but their silence. The Picts left no written words, no scrolls, no books to explain their story. Instead, they carved symbols, circles, beasts, and patterns into stones scattered across Scotland. Those carvings became their only voice, the only clue to a people who seemed determined to hide their truth. For hundreds of years, experts tried to decode them, hoping to find a message from the past. But every discovery only led to more questions. It was almost as if the Picts wanted their secrets to stay hidden forever. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared in history, they were gone. Around the 9th century, their name began to fade. The records stopped mentioning them, and the mighty Pictish tribes vanished from the chronicles of kings. Some believed they were destroyed by war or disease. Others thought they blended into the new Scottish kingdoms, their identity slowly disappearing as generations passed. Whatever the reason, the Picts seemed to melt into time, their voices silenced, their legacy buried beneath centuries of change. And yet, the mystery never stopped calling. Who were these people really? Were they the first true Scots? Were their roots from somewhere far beyond Britain? How did they rise so fiercely and then disappear so completely? The deeper historians searched, the more tangled the story became. Their ruins, their carvings, their graves all seemed to hold clues that refused to give clear answers. But science had other plans. When modern researchers began to uncover Pictish burial sites, they realized they might finally have a way to solve the puzzle. Ancient bones found in northern Scotland carried the last remaining traces of their bloodline. Through DNA testing, scientists hoped to look beyond myths and legends and reveal the truth written in their genes. It was a discovery that promised to rewrite everything people thought they knew about the origins of the Scottish people. The Picts may have vanished from sight, but their story was far from over. Every stone, every buried skeleton, every whisper of their past was leading toward a discovery that would shake the foundation of Scottish history. What scientists would soon uncover in their DNA wasn't just fascinating, it was unsettling. A revelation that would change how we see the ancient world forever. And as the first test results came in, the truth that began to emerge was far more disturbing than anyone expected. What scientists found buried in the Picts' genetic code would not only explain their disappearance, it would reveal something darker about what really happened to Scotland's lost warriors, a civilization erased from the history. For centuries, people believed the story of the Picts had ended long ago, buried under layers of soil and silence. But everything changed when a team of archaeologists stumbled upon something extraordinary deep in the north of Scotland. In a quiet valley surrounded by fog and heather, they uncovered a forgotten burial site believed to belong to the ancient Picts themselves. The discovery sparked immediate excitement. Finally, after years of searching, Scientists had physical evidence, bones that could still carry the whispers of an ancient people. The remains were carefully removed, every bone and fragment treated as if it were a message from the past. The scientists didn't just want to know how these people looked or how they died. They wanted to see what secrets were locked inside their DNA. This was more than just an archaeological dig. It was a doorway to the lost history of Scotland. As the team began their analysis, they expected to uncover ordinary results, perhaps confirming the Picts' connection to other early Scottish tribes. But what they found turned everything upside down. The results were nothing like what anyone predicted. The DNA told a story that seemed to defy everything written in the history books. For the first time, the Picts were no longer just shadows or legends. Their genetic code began to paint a clearer picture of who they were, and it was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The analysis revealed unexpected links between the Picts and ancient groups spread far across Europe. Some of their genes hinted at origins reaching back to the earliest settlers of Britain, while others connected them to mysterious populations that had once vanished from the map. Even more surprising, the DNA showed that the Picts didn't disappear, as people had always believed. Their bloodline had quietly survived, hidden within the genes of modern Scots. This meant that somewhere, in the faces of today's Scottish families, traces of the ancient Picts still lived on. It was a breathtaking revelation. The idea that the so-called lost warriors of Scotland were never truly lost, just mixed into the fabric of history. But the discovery didn't end there. As scientists dug deeper into the data, strange and troubling details began to appear. The genetic patterns showed signs of something unusual, a sudden shift in the population that didn't fit any known migration or natural change. It hinted at a possible event that could have caused a massive transformation in their communities. Some researchers believed it could have been a wave of disease or even an invasion that left the Picts' world broken and scattered. Whatever happened, it was enough to nearly erase their presence in just a few generations. This stunning twist reignited debates among historians. If the Picts' DNA still existed, why did their culture and language vanish completely? What could have caused such a total disappearance of their identity while their bloodline quietly continued? The answers were buried deeper than anyone expected, tangled in centuries of conflict, assimilation, and forgotten history. As the discoveries continued, it became clear that the story of the Picts was not one of extinction but of transformation. They hadn't vanished. They had been absorbed, rewritten into the genetic story of Scotland itself. Yet this truth also carried a darker edge. It raised questions about what or who forced that change, and why their proud identity had to be erased to make way for something new. For years, people had romanticized the Picts as wild warriors who disappeared into legend. Now science was revealing a far more human and far more painful story, one that spoke of survival, loss, and secrets buried in every generation since. And as the research team pushed further into their DNA, they began to uncover connections that went far beyond Scotland, clues that hinted at hidden relationships, forbidden alliances, and a shocking truth about who the Picts might have really been. What the scientists were about to find next would take the mystery of the Picts from fascinating to disturbing, a discovery that would change everything we thought we knew about the ancient people of Scotland. The discovery that changed everything. The discovery sent ripples through the scientific world. The deeper researchers explored the Picts' DNA, the stranger the story became. What had started as a routine genetic study soon turned into one of the most unsettling archaeological revelations in Scotland's history. The sequencing results didn't just reshape what people believed about the Picts, they exposed hidden chapters of human history that no one was ready to face. At first, scientists thought they would find simple answers, perhaps proof that the Picts were direct descendants of early Celtic tribes. But as the genetic data unfolded, something completely unexpected appeared. The Picts' DNA carried traces of an ancient lineage far older than anyone had imagined. Some of their ancestry reached back to prehistoric hunter-gatherers who lived in Britain thousands of years before the Celts ever arrived. This meant that the Picts weren't outsiders who invaded Scotland. They were among its very first people, rooted deep in the land itself. But that wasn't the only surprise. Their genetic signature didn't match any modern Scottish population exactly. It was distinct, as if their bloodline had branched off long ago and evolved separately, creating a unique identity that no other group shared. For centuries, legends painted the Picts as strange and different, almost otherworldly. Now, science was confirming that in a way, they truly were. Their DNA carried rare markers not found anywhere else in Britain. It was as if the Picts had remained isolated for generations, living in their own world, protected by geography and perhaps by choice. Still, what puzzled scientists most wasn't just who they were, it was what happened to them. Around the 9th century, a drastic shift occurred. The genetic evidence showed a sudden blending with other populations, especially those from the Gaelic kingdoms in the west. It looked like the Picts had merged into these new groups, losing their cultural identity, but leaving behind faint traces in their descendants. This merging didn't seem peaceful. It carried the marks of conflict, forced alliances, and possibly survival under pressure. Something dramatic had changed their way of life, and their DNA told the story silently. The more they studied, the darker the picture grew. There were signs that entire Pictish communities may have collapsed rapidly, possibly due to famine, disease, or invasion. The genetic diversity in their remains dropped sharply, suggesting population loss and isolation. It was as though the Picts had fought to survive a devastating event, but in the process, their unique identity had been swallowed by the rise of a new Scottish kingdom. What remained of them lived on quietly in the genes of those who came after, invisible, unspoken, but still there. These findings left historians and scientists in shock. For generations, they had searched for physical proof of what happened to the Picts, and now, through DNA, they were finally hearing the truth. The ancient warriors who painted their bodies in blue, who terrified empires and built stone monuments, hadn't vanished completely. They had transformed, becoming part of the very people who replaced them. The discovery blurred the lines between conqueror and conquered, showing how fragile identity can be when history decides to rewrite itself. But the DNA held one final twist. Some of the genetic links pointed beyond Scotland to Northern Europe and even regions farther east. This suggested that the Picts may have shared connections with groups long thought unrelated to the British Isles. These distant ties raised new theories about migrations, trade, and even secret alliances that had shaped early Scotland in ways no one had ever imagined. The sequencing had done more than just solve a mystery. It had exposed a story of resilience, tragedy, and transformation buried beneath centuries of myth. The Picts were no longer just ghosts of the past. Their blood still pulsed in the people of modern Scotland, carrying memories of a time when painted warriors ruled the Highlands. And just as scientists began to make sense of it all, the data revealed something far more disturbing. Evidence that what happened to the Picts might not have been natural at all. Something or someone could have played a role in their disappearance, and that clue was hidden deep within their DNA. Inside the genetic secrets of the Picts. As scientists dug even deeper into the ancient genetic code, the mystery only thickened. What they found inside the Picts' DNA wasn't just a record of ancestry. It was a hidden story of struggle, change, and something far more unsettling. The sequences began to reveal patterns that didn't fit any known explanation. It was as if the Picts' genes carried a memory of something dark that had happened long ago, something that reshaped their entire population. The researchers started to notice strange gaps in the data. In certain burial sites, the DNA showed sudden shifts, the kind that usually come from a major outside influence. There were traces of genetic material that didn't match the earlier Pictish lines. It appeared suddenly, almost like a foreign signature that had mixed into their population at an unexpected time. Some scientists suspected that this could have come from invasions or migrations, but the timing didn't fit neatly with any known historical record. Others began to wonder if something more hidden had occurred, a merging that was forced rather than chosen. The pattern looked eerily like the aftermath of a population collapse. Some groups had completely vanished, replaced by others whose origins didn't match local ancestry. The evidence suggested that a massive cultural and biological shift had taken place in a short period. Villages may have been abandoned, families scattered, and entire clans erased. Whatever caused this change didn't just wipe out the Pictish name. It rewired the very roots of their identity. But the most haunting discovery came when scientists compared the Picts' DNA with that of early medieval skeletons found in nearby regions. In some samples, the genetic code seemed too mixed, almost unnaturally so, as though generations of intermarriage had been accelerated under extreme conditions. It hinted at survival by necessity, a people blending with newcomers to endure a period of chaos. It wasn't a peaceful merging. It looked desperate. The DNA told the silent story of a civilization fighting extinction, one that may have sacrificed its own culture to stay alive. That realization hit hard. The Picts were no longer the fearless warriors from old legends. They were people who had faced unthinkable hardship. Their bloodline carried signs of hunger, disease, and isolation, genetic scars that still echoed after centuries. The beauty of their stone carvings, the strength of their fortresses, and the pride of their painted bodies all faded in the face of survival. Science was peeling away the myths and showing something heartbreakingly human beneath, a people brought to their knees by forces beyond their control. Yet what made the story even stranger was how perfectly their disappearance aligned with the rise of a new power in Scotland. Around the same time the Picts' identity dissolved, the Gaelic-speaking Scots began expanding from the west, building a new kingdom. It seemed almost too perfect a coincidence. Historians had long believed this was just a natural uniting of tribes, but the DNA evidence suggested otherwise. The sudden replacement of the Pictish genetic pattern was too fast, too clean. It felt like erasure, a rewriting of who belonged to Scotland. That realization brought a chilling question. Did the Picts simply fade away through peaceful assimilation, or were they deliberately removed? The DNA couldn't answer with certainty, but its silence was heavy. As the research continued, more unsettling patterns appeared, mutations and markers that didn't match known European populations of that time. These anomalies hinted at an older, possibly forgotten ancestry that the Picts carried uniquely. It was as if they had preserved something ancient that the rest of the world had long lost. For the scientists, it was both thrilling and terrifying. They had started this study to understand who the Picts were. Instead, they were uncovering how they were erased. And what made the revelation even more haunting was that this wasn't just a chapter from the past. Traces of that disappearance still lingered in the genes of people living today. The DNA was no longer just telling a story of ancient warriors. It was whispering a warning about how easily an entire people could be erased, not just from memory, but from the very code of life itself. And as the researchers moved toward the next phase of their study, the evidence began to point in one shocking direction, a discovery that would make the world question not just what happened to the Picts, but who made it happen. A disturbing ancestry connection. The discoveries that followed were unlike anything the research team expected. What started as a study of ancient Scottish ancestry was now beginning to feel like uncovering a hidden conspiracy written in the bones of the past. The closer scientists looked, the clearer it became that the Picts' disappearance hadn't been a quiet fade into history. It was sudden, violent, and deeply unnatural. The DNA wasn't just revealing who they were, it was hinting at what had been done to them. As the genetic sequencing expanded, new samples from other Pictish sites began to show an alarming pattern. In several locations, traces of foreign DNA appeared almost overnight in the timeline, not gradually as would happen with peaceful mixing, but sharply, as if a new group had replaced the old one within a single generation. This shift aligned with a period of heavy political tension and invasion in early medieval Scotland, when new forces were rising from the west and south. But what shocked the scientists most was how completely the original Pictish DNA dropped after that point. When the team overlaid this genetic evidence with historical data, the connections became even more disturbing. Around the same time the DNA shift occurred, the Gaelic kingdoms were expanding rapidly across northern Britain. Ancient chronicles spoke vaguely of alliances and unions, but the DNA suggested something far more aggressive, a takeover hidden beneath the language of unification. It appeared that the Picts had been absorbed not by choice, but by force. Their culture, their names, and even their genes had been overwritten to build a new Scottish identity. This revelation changed everything. It meant that the Picts didn't simply vanish. They were deliberately assimilated, their blood diluted and their culture replaced. It was a kind of genetic conquest, silent but absolute. And within that story of forced blending, the scientists noticed a chilling detail. Some of the genetic lines ended completely, showing no continuation at all. That meant entire clans had died out, leaving no descendants. The Picts' final moments weren't just emerging, they were an ending. But what disturbed the researchers most was how organized it all seemed. The DNA didn't show signs of chaos, it showed precision. The replacement of one genetic group by another happened too swiftly, too cleanly, as though it had been controlled. The more they studied, the more it looked like the Picts' disappearance wasn't just a tragic accident of history, it was an intentional erasure, a reshaping of Scotland's earliest people to fit a new narrative. This discovery sparked intense debate. Some experts argued that the results might simply reflect migration and intermarriage, but others weren't so sure. The genetic data didn't look natural. It looked engineered by time and circumstance, as if the new rulers of Scotland had made sure the old identity of the Picts could never return. The fusion of cultures that followed created what we now know as the Scottish nation, but it came at the cost of an entire civilization's legacy. Yet hidden in the details of the DNA, there was still something beautiful. A few ancient markers survived, faint but defiant, in the genes of modern Scots. They were small reminders that the Picts had not been completely erased. They had endured, quietly woven into the heart of Scotland's people. It was as if their spirit had refused to die, living on in the land, the traditions, and the stories that still echoed through the Highlands. For the scientists, it was bittersweet. They had uncovered the truth of a tale of conquest, loss, and survival written in the smallest code of life. The Picts' story was no longer a mystery of vanishing tribes, but a revelation of how power, history, and identity can reshape humanity itself. And as they examined the last strands of DNA, one question began to haunt them. If this could happen once, how many other peoples and cultures had been erased without a trace, their stories lost beneath the weight of rewritten history? The answer to that question would emerge as the research continued, a discovery that would take the scientists beyond Scotland into a web of ancient connections stretching across Europe, revealing that the Picts' fate was part of something much larger and far more unsettling than anyone had imagined. The vanishing bloodline mystery. As the investigation expanded beyond Scotland, the story took an even darker turn. What began as a local study of ancient tribes was now uncovering patterns that stretched far beyond the Scottish Highlands. The scientists started comparing the Pictish DNA with samples from across Europe, and the results were startling. They found similar genetic breaks, sudden disappearances of unique lineages happening at almost the same time in other ancient societies. It was as if multiple cultures across the continent had been erased in synchronized silence. The deeper the team dug, the more unsettling the picture became. The same mysterious gaps that marked the fall of the Picts also appeared in regions once home to other ancient peoples, tribes from northern Germany, Scandinavia, and even parts of Ireland. Their distinct genetic markers vanished, replaced by new ones that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The pattern was too consistent to be random. Something or someone had changed the face of ancient Europe, leaving only faint traces of what once existed. Back in Scotland, the researchers focused on one final question: why the Picts had disappeared so completely when other tribes survived. As they analyzed the data, they noticed something peculiar in the surviving DNA. A portion of the Picts' genetic sequence carried rare mutations that didn't appear in later populations. These mutations weren't harmful, but they were unique, almost like a biological signature that set the Picts apart. And then, after a certain period, those markers were gone, completely replaced by new ones that suggested a deliberate genetic blending. It was as if someone had tried to erase the old lineage and rewrite it with new blood. The scientists couldn't prove it, but the precision of the genetic shift was too sharp to ignore. It was not a slow evolution. It was abrupt, coordinated, and final. If the Picts were truly among Scotland's first people, then this meant that the foundation of the nation had been built upon the quiet removal of its original inhabitants. The discovery sent shockwaves through the academic world. Historians tried to soften the story, calling it cultural transformation, but the DNA told something harsher: extinction by replacement. The once proud painted warriors who resisted empires had not been defeated in open battle. They had been absorbed and overwritten until even their bones could barely speak their name. The thought of it was heartbreaking. The Picts, who once stood against Rome and nature itself, had survived countless challenges, only to be undone by time and assimilation. Still, within that tragedy lay something powerful. The few Pictish markers that did survive showed incredible resilience. Despite centuries of change, their traces still lingered in the genes of people living across northern Scotland. In those quiet villages and rugged coasts, fragments of Pictish heritage remained alive, not in monuments or carvings, but in living blood. The scientists realized they were not just studying history, they were touching the past through the people of the present. And yet, the mystery didn't end there. The more they mapped these surviving traces, the more they uncovered another astonishing connection, one that hinted at ancient links between the Picts and forgotten European populations that predated known history. These findings suggested that the Picts were not just Scotland's lost tribe, but part of a much older network of people who once shaped the continent before being erased from the record. It was a revelation that made everyone pause. The DNA of the Picts wasn't just a local curiosity. It was a missing piece of a much larger human puzzle. Their disappearance might not have been an isolated tragedy, but part of a wave of cultural erasures that shaped the modern world. The past was no longer something distant. It was alive, breathing through generations, still carrying the silent echoes of those who had been forgotten. As the researchers stood at the edge of their findings, one thing became clear. The story of the Picts was not just about loss, it was about endurance. But as the team prepared to publish their final report, the lead scientist noticed one more anomaly in the data, a strange sequence that didn't belong to any known human lineage. It was faint, almost invisible, but it didn't match the DNA of the Picts, the Celts, or any ancient group in their database. It was something entirely different. And with that discovery, the mystery of the Picts was no longer just about history. It was about something that might change everything we thought we knew about where humanity truly came from. What this means for modern Scotland. As the research came to its final stage, everything led back to where it all began, Scotland itself. The scientists compared the Picts' ancient DNA with that of modern Scots, and what they found was deeply emotional. Hidden beneath generations of mixing and migration, tiny fragments of Pictish genes still lingered in the blood of people living across the northern highlands and coastal villages. It was living proof that the Picts had never fully vanished. Their story didn't end in disappearance. It continued quietly through time, woven into the very fabric of modern Scotland. This realization brought a wave of awe and sadness. The Picts had fought, lived, and loved in those same lands, and though their names and symbols had been erased, some of them had survived, not in ruins or relics, but in the people themselves. It was as if the land had refused to let go of them, keeping their spirit alive in every hill, river, and heartbeat of those who came after. The scientists understood then that this discovery was more than just a historical revelation. It was a story about endurance, about how even when people are silenced, their essence can't be destroyed. The Picts' language may be lost, their carvings weathered by time, but their strength still lives on in every generation born on Scottish soil. They were never truly gone. Their story had simply changed form, becoming part of the living memory of Scotland itself, silent, powerful, and eternal. So, what do you think about the shocking truth hidden in the Picts' DNA? Were they really erased, or did they find a way to live on through modern Scotland? Let's hear from you in the comments. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.